All right, truly a one-of-its-kind initiative. I would now request Sri Jayesh Ranjan, Principal Secretary of Industries and Commerce and Information Technology, Departments of the Telangana Government, and Mr. Surendra Rosha, Co-CEO of HSBC Asia Pacific, to please join us on stage for our conversation on the transformative journey of women in Telangana and India. Shereen, request you to again take this conversation forward. Well, once again, Mr. Ranjan and Surendra, many thanks for joining us here today. We've heard a lot about what is happening in the state of Telangana. We've just been given a tour of the T Hub, and of course, we know the story about the We Hub as well. And as I pointed out, the Chief Minister is on record to say that he wants this to be a women welfare state. Now, as the government completes 9 years in office, as the state completes 9 years as well, what is it that you believe is required at this point in time in terms of intervention, in terms of prioritization, Mr. Ranjan?
Sure. So, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Rocha. First of all, thanks for bringing this event to Hyderabad. Quite belated, I would say, but nevertheless glad that it has come here. So to answer your question, I'd like to make a fundamental point to preface my answer. See, one is that when we talk about women or female, first of all, we should recognize that it is not a heterogeneous group. I mean, it's not a homogeneous group. Yeah. There's lots of heterogeneity. There are urban women, there are rural women. And we should also look at it from a life cycle approach. So whoever is a woman today is born as a girl baby, and then she grows up, and then obviously she attains womanhood, and then she becomes older. So in Telangana, whatever we have done in the last 9 years, in some ways we have captured these two things. First of all, we have designed programs for urban women, for rural women. My colleague Deepti was in the earlier panel. She spoke about an interesting program which runs in the rural areas to capture innovation, entrepreneurship. We have a strong self-help groups movement in the rural areas. And we have also taken this life cycle approach. So for example, the kind of programs that are run in Telangana for young girl children through Anganwadi programs, through early schooling, through kind of late schooling. What kind of attempts are made to encourage more and more girls to choose STEM courses, not to get intimidated by the fact that people before them have chosen an easier kind of a career path, or many of them don't have a formal career to kind of speak about. So these are some of the nuances through which our government has operated. And at the end of these 9 years, I feel very proud that we have been able to show amazing results on different fronts. We Hub, T Hub are some of the examples, but lots of good work has happened at the grassroots in terms of social mobilization. In fact, you'll be amazed to know that Telangana has a bank run by the government, which is a bank meant only for women. It is meant for self-help group women. And today it is the largest bank of that category, that class. So lots of things we kind of don't acknowledge or don't talk about. But if you look at the totality of the picture, there's a lot that we have done, and every initiative has been well thought through. There is a purpose, there's a way to monitor the outcomes, and the success of these 9 years they speak for themselves.
Well, you're right in pointing out that we must not treat this as a homogeneous group, that there are many differences, and hence there cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. And I will get to some of those specific interventions in just a second, because you talked about this life cycle approach that you have adopted as far as your policies are concerned. But Surendra, he was talking about setting up a bank that services women, and I want to understand from you at HSBC, not just from an India perspective, but more from a regional perspective, since you oversee the region as well. This is access to capital, access to finance is a big challenge for women when they want to get into business, for women when they want to scale up. Even women entrepreneurs find it hard to get VC funding, for instance. It's much easier for the men to do so, and that's what the data tells us. What's been your experience, and how do you believe we can remedy the situation?
Firstly, good evening, and thank you for having me here. And congratulations on this initiative. It's a fantastic way forward. Look, I think the point about homogeneity is a very important one. And we have to recognize that it is not just homogeneous across the region or in India or in a particular group. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, it differs again because there are, in our experience, there are women who are starting out as entrepreneurs. There are women who worked a fair amount of their career and then want to branch out on their own. And the barriers are quite different across this space. I think for an organization like us, one of the strengths is the network. And what do we bring into that conversation is really being able to bring people who've done that journey or made that journey into the conversation, connect them with the person who wants to be an entrepreneur, who's perhaps facing challenges which someone else did and has overcome. And creating that network does create the opportunity to lower the barrier of concern that occurs or the barrier of in your mind that occurs that says this looks too difficult. When you've seen somebody else do it and they talk to you. So that mentorship, that allyship, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman entrepreneur talking to another woman entrepreneur. It could be a male. So the idea of a male ally in this conversation or a male mentor is equally accommodated. So I think for us, that's really important. Access to capital is difficult always. It doesn't matter which gender you're from.
No, it is specifically harder for women.
It is specifically, I'll acknowledge that. But the reality is, having access to that network is equally important. I think that's super important from the perspective of what someone like us can do to assist in the journey.
Right. Mr. Ranjan, you talked about several of the measures that you've undertaken, both for urban as well as women in the rural parts of the state. If I were to ask you about outcome, because you said that you are monitoring outcome, what has been the most successful program or most successful programs? And as you now look forward, where do you believe government capital, government resources need to be put in?
So, I'm sure you would have heard of this. Because we are completing 9 years, we are entering into the 10th year. Lots of information about how the state has performed in these 9 years is flowing out. One of the most significant achievements has been the phenomenal rise in the per capita income. The state's per capita income from what it was in 2014 and what it is now has risen by 130%, more than doubled. So a significant part of it has been contributed by women. And that has happened because we have taken lots of efforts to mobilize women at the grassroots into very strong receiving mechanisms. See, governments typically all over the world, all over the country are considered to be welfare oriented. I mean, the tendency is to start giving this, giving that, but not much attention is paid on who is there to receive whatever you are giving. And if that receiving mechanism is not strong enough, whatever you are delivering from the top will not be optimally utilized.
Right.
So that effort has been done in Telangana, forming self-help groups, strengthening self-help groups, building their capacities. And today, as I mentioned, we have a bank for them to cater to their consumption requirements, the productive kind of projects that they may like to follow. So that has been one of the most significant achievements, that you have created a whole new opportunities for rural women who erstwhile, it's not to say that they were not contributing anything, even if they were looking after agriculture, farms and home-based activities, they were still contributing to the welfare of the family, to the society, to the economy. But their productivity has increased manyfold today. And this is one very important intervention I would say that we have succeeded in. And there are lots of urban interventions as well. You spoke about VHub, you spoke about the industrial park in the earlier panel. Those are good examples. But I would still feel that if you look back at these 9 years, the work that has happened in the rural areas is far more significant, but not really much talked about, much written about. And that is something which I would like to really get corrected.
Okay, well, we'll do that here on this panel. But Surendra, I want to address the issue that we just heard from Mr. Ranjan about that the per capita has seen a significant increase, and largely on the back of the fact that you've actually got women to, in a sense, achieve their potential, or women to contribute to growth as well. Now, when we have these conversations, and a lot of people continue to argue that why do we need to focus on this? Why does it even matter? Now, this is a great example of why it matters. When you speak to your clients, when you speak to your leadership, etc., what is the narrative that you're selling when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
So there's a whole lot of research that talks about why being a more diverse, more inclusive organization makes you better, it makes you more productive. But if you just take simple statistics, in the G20 countries, if we were to increase female participation rates, we would add approximately 5.8 trillion to the GDP over the next 5 to 6 years. So I think these are real numbers. And when it comes to enterprises that work in the ecosystem in many of these markets, they recognize this. I think also what's really important is, from an India perspective, is we have a young population. There are more people joining the workforce or being eligible to join the workforce than ever before. And if you look to nations that are aging, you realize that one of the gaps many of them have is they don't have enough participation by women in the workforce to overcome what the aging population is now creating. So we have a real opportunity to set a base, a trend. And I think this is a conversation that is increasingly happening in a number of the boardrooms where when we look at our India business and we say, what more can we do? And it can't be something we've done elsewhere. We've got to do it for India here.
Yeah, I would imagine that you will have to customize solutions specific to India. But, you know, speaking about conversations in the boardroom, what's the conversation at HSBC? The previous panel was setting bold targets for individual companies, and we had their leaders raise those here with us. What's the roadmap for HSBC?
So look, we got to 30% in our senior leadership globally in 2020. We want to get to 35% by 2025, and we want to keep improving that till we get to the parity number. In Asia, we are closer to 39, but at a global level, we are currently at 33. So there's work being done, but I think ultimately it's not just about the senior leadership. One of the things we've recognized, for example, here in India is that women leave the workforce at a point in time in their career because they want to focus on family or they want to focus on other obligations that they may have, and then they look to come back. Now, certainly in banking in the past, there wasn't a career path back in. Now, the team has put together a program called Power to Her that brings that ability now to say, if you've taken a break and you want to come back, we want you to come back with us. Mm-hmm. How do we facilitate that? And I think it's these kind of interventions that have helped us continue to get towards that parity number.
You know, Mr. Ranjan, Telangana is one of the states that has encouraged women, but also created, you know, space for women to operate and feel safe to operate. And it has amongst the largest working women population. Now, this is a problem, right? Safety, security, transportation, especially access to good quality public transportation, safe transportation. You know, what can the state do in terms of this kind of infrastructure to ensure that women find an enabling environment to be able to access work?
But before that, can I also add a comment to this point which is being discussed on how do you increase representation of women in the boards and in executive leadership? So I appreciate the point which was made by the Deloitte Deepti in the earlier panel about increasing the pool of women. If the pool increases, then obviously it becomes easier to pick the best and the brightest amongst them and raise it to 50% or even more. And that is where I believe the government has a very important responsibility. And that is again something that we are doing pretty well in Telangana. So again, to share the interesting data point with you, Telangana today has the highest number of residential schools for girls per capita in the country. And the possibility of giving a very high quality education, motivating the students in those schools about proper career paths.
And these are largely government or a mix?
These are all government. These are all government. And also we have been very conscious of the fact that there are underprivileged families from the Dalit communities, from the minority communities whose educational track record is very low. I mean, their previous generations have never been to school. So these would be first generation learners. So if children are from that background, there is very little home support they get about their education. And the residential school becomes therefore the only place where they can be given proper mentoring, proper nurturing. So these schools are doing phenomenally well. And this again has been a very conscious decision. So you spoke about 450 crores which has been spent to build this facility, the T-Hub that is. But thousands of crores have gone behind those residential schools. And again, that is the foundational kind of work which our government does to ensure that more number of girls get into schools, get into very high quality educational opportunities, not ordinary schools. So if you look at the board results or We have this common engineering exam, entrance exam, which is called MSET. You see who are the students who are topping these kind of exams. These are typically students from these residential schools. Many of them also get a chance to crack at some of these national level competitive exams. They do so many other great things. Some of them have even climbed Mount Everest. You will not believe this. That's a girl, incidentally, from one of the residential schools.
Well, that only goes to show that girls and women can do anything that they set their minds on.
Of course. So that is what. So to address the earlier question, I mean, if you push someone to say that whether they will achieve 50% or not, I mean, definitely there must be an internal target. But is there a large enough pool to pick women leaders from is something also needs to be worked through. And that is where we meaning the government, can play a very important role. But to quickly address what you had really asked me about safety, about a congenial work environment. So again, I believe that that's something which is very, very important. And our Chief Minister was very focused on this when he took over the responsibilities of Telangana. One of the first initiatives was to send a team of women officers across the world to find out what are the best practices to ensure safety, ensure that kind of levels of comfort of participating in a mixed workplace. And 2-3 very important outcomes. One of it is called She Teams. So in Hyderabad, so we are right now in a place which is called Cyberabad. This enclave is Cyberabad, where all the tech companies, all the knowledge institutions are located. So you will not realize, but they'll be amongst the thousands of people who are milling around, lots of people in plain clothes who are actually policemen, who are members of the She Teams, and they are kind of keeping a watch, keeping an eye, increasing the number of surveillance cameras, making the companies, the tech companies who are located in this enclave, participate with the government in doing community patrolling and community policing, citizen policing. There is an institution called the Cyberabad Security Council, which is largely populated by the tech companies and the local police. So lots of things have been done, and I don't have precise data, but I know for sure that the crime levels and these kind of issues which typically pull a woman down or a family down from sending their girl children to work, those incidents are very far and few between. I don't have, as I said, precise data, but I won't be surprised if the numbers which are registered in Hyderabad are amongst the lowest amongst metropolitan cities.
Okay, that's good to hear. But Surendra, I want to come back to you and talk about, access to technology and how you are, for instance, using that. The previous panel talked about access to technology and the use of technology to remove biases. As a bank, for instance, how are you using technology to also ensure that lending becomes a lot more inclusive?
Well, I think increasingly technology is the backbone for lending decisions, right? Whether it is looking at the history of the person or the entity that's looking to borrow, or for a variety of other factors that we take into account. So technology certainly is the backbone. Now, how do we think about making it more diverse or enabling female participation, particularly as entrepreneurs? So we have set up a fund that is entirely focused on female entrepreneurs, which is circa about $1 billion in terms of funding the effort. But what's more important is we are learning from those interactions on how we can improve the decision making for future funds or future investments that we make or lending decisions that we make. So there is a need to be iterative. There is a need to recognize your blind spots, because there are blind spots, and we need to constantly look out for that, and that's what we're using technology for more and more.
How much of the 1 billion is allocated for India and women entrepreneurs in India?
I don't have the data with me at the moment, but India is part of that process.
Okay, that's good to hear. You wanted to talk about some of the efforts on the rural side that you believe have been the most impactful, and I want to address that issue because, this movement is also about diversity. It's not just about talking to certain kind of women from a certain socio-economic background. It is talking to women who are part of self-help groups. It's talking to women who don't have access to technology and education and so on and so forth. How are you addressing some of those needs which continue to be a big challenge in large parts of India?
So I alluded to it earlier that it begins by very strong dose of social mobilization, create very strong self-help groups, and build their capacities to the best possible level so that whatever tomorrow you want to deliver to them, They understand the value of it, they reciprocate, they participate. So that foundation is very strong, Telangana. Again, since I don't look after that part of the work specifically, I don't have precise numbers, but I know for sure that literally every woman in the rural areas, particularly those who belong to the poor communities, etc., they have all been mobilized into strong groups. And once that mobilization is done, then you start discussing with them what could be the best livelihood options for them. So first of all, you look around, what are the others doing, which is doing well? Can you replicate it? Are there entry barriers in doing that? Is that opportunity saturated? So in a very structured and scientific way, that kind of guidance is given, opportunities are identified, and then through the proper procedure, like you prepare a business plan, you pose it before a funding institution, you create institutions locally who will handhold you, you tie up backward linkages, forward linkages. So as I mentioned, the per capita rise which our state has seen, a large part of it has come in this manner. If we do an exercise to quantify, I'll not be surprised at all if you see a very high figure, a very high proportion behind that per capita rise in that state being contributed by women and their self-help groups and their economic enterprises and business activities.
Okay, so let me end by getting both of you to commit to the priorities that you're intending to focus on, and I'll start by asking you, Surendra, you know, what does the roadmap for you look like? Are you tying yourself down to any specific targets or any specific outcomes?
Well, I think the outcome ultimately has to be parity at a leadership level. Our largest workforce globally is in India, and our lowest gender participation in the leadership level is in India, which sort of in amongst our larger markets. So we have a lot of work to do. We need to be micro in our interventions to help this process. So that's certainly something we're committing to. But I think more importantly for us, it's to be part of journeys like this so that we can learn from other organizations and bring those practices into ours as well.
So, Mr. Ranjan, year 10, give me a sneak peek into what we can expect in terms of priorities, in terms of fresh announcements, in terms of fresh measures.
So I can speak of the subjects that I look after. I look after information technology, industries, entrepreneurship, innovation. In these,
that's pretty much most of it.
No. Well, I don't look after, let us say, the rural activities that I spoke about, education, where great work is happening. But in the things that I do...
You'll fund that.
We are already doing pretty well, but definitely there is no end to it. You need to do more. So, for instance, there are 3 dedicated industrial parks for women entrepreneurs. We would like that number to go up, more and more women to take up manufacturing activities, high-tech manufacturing. Similarly, we have VHub in Hyderabad, which obviously has been doing great work. But we would like this to be decentralized, have maybe 5 more VHubs or 10 more VHubs in the sub-district levels in the state. We right now have approximately 30% girls who complete their 12th grade who join a STEM course in the state. We would like that number to maybe double or even go beyond that. So these are all doable because, as I said, the first 10 years have been spent in laying down very strong foundation, doing that foundation work, which is very important. If you don't do that, you just won't reach there. So that has been done. It has given us very encouraging initial results, and we want to build upon it and do much more in the coming 10 years.
Well, we look forward to the much more that you speak of. And thank you very much for joining us here this evening, for sharing with us what's happened in terms of impact so far, but more importantly, what you hope to achieve along the way. Surendra Rosha, thank you so much for joining us here this evening. We appreciate your time and thank you for sharing your story and your journey here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Jayesh Ranjan and Surendra Rosha.
Thank you, everyone, for this insightful conversation on the key enablers for a holistic development that has made major strides that need to be made in attaining gender parity. We now have a very